welcome back to Just Another Stitch. For those that don't know me, my name is Connie, and if you're new to my channel, I'd like to welcome you. So today, I will be doing my very first knit-along. I'm very excited about this. So we're going to be making a striped knitted adult beanie. And if you've never knitted a beanie before, that's okay. I will walk you through everything you need to know. I do advise though that you at least know how to do a knit stitch, a purl stitch, and knit two together. Those are the stitches that you need to know how to do to make this beanie. So the way this knit along will work, I will do a video once a week over 4 weeks, and y'all knit along with me. And at the end, I would love to see the beanies that y'all made with this knit along, and I'll make a video showing y'all beanies. And even if you don't participate in the knit along and you come across this video later on after the knit along's over with, you can still make this beanie, because these videos is basically a tutorial, and I will also share some other knitting knowledge along the way while showing y'all how to do this beanie. So what will you need for this knit along? You will need 3 different colors of number 4 weighted yarn. Any number 4 weighted yarn will work. I'm using the Big Twist, and I'm using purple, gray, and blue. Those are the 3 colors I'll be using. So for the knitting needles that you will need a 5mm and a 5.5mm circular knitting needle. Now I use the interchangeable ones, as you see here, where I use the little screwdriver device to screw them on the cord, and these are my 5.5mm right here. And the cord that I use a 9-inch cord. And also I like using the short knitting needles. I find you have more room to work with. When you use the longer needles with beanies, I find it gets tighter. So you will need this. Then, when it comes to the decreases, there are different methods that you can do the decreases. I will be showing y'all how to do it on double pointed needles and the magic loop method. Now, one thing, you can also get a shorter cord. I don't have one. And just keep doing the decreases on your circulars, where you just transfer it to the smaller cord. But the method I usually do when I make my beanies, I use double pointed needles. So you will need, if you do this method, you will need 5.5mm knitting needles, the double pointed knitting needles. And you see, it's a set of 5 that I have. So you will need that if you do that method. Now, if you do the magic loop method, you will need a longer cord or a pair of 5.5 circular knitting needles that has a longer cord for doing the decreases. And then the other things that I advise having, you'll need a pair of scissors. You will need a darning needle to weave in your ends. You will need a stitch marker. This is to mark the beginning of your rounds. I always recommend having end caps. This will protect you from drop stitches when you lay down your work. And also, I usually advise to have a tape measure. Sometimes you will see patterns that will have you measuring how long you want things on your hat. So it's always a good idea to have a tape measure when you make beanies. So let's get started on the knit along. Okay, so now we're going to start working on the brim portion of the beanie. And you're going to want to grab your 5mm circular knitting needles. That's what we're going to use for the brim. And one thing I like to do when I'm casting on my stitches, I like to take an end cap and put it on the right side of my knitting needles like that. It just adds some extra protection. That way your stitches don't accidentally slip off this side. And I'm using the gray yarn for the brim. And with knitting, you have different cast on methods. Some patterns, they'll tell you you can use your preferred method. Now, some patterns, it does matter what method you use. And if a pattern specifies a method, that's the method that you need to use. Now, usually with making beanies, the popular cast on method that most people use is the long tail cast on. I do my cast on a little differently, and that's how I'm going to show it in this tutorial. But if you already know how to do the long tail cast on method and you wish to do that for this knit along, that's fine. It's not going to make a difference. So I'm casting on 80 stitches. So that's going to be our cast on. And if you've never done a cast on, I'm going to show you how I do mine. And like I said, I do mine a little different than the long tail. So I initially lay my yarn over my knitting needle, the right side. To the right, you'll have the end piece, okay? I take my hand, I grab the yarn like this with my thumb up. I wrap my thumb around. I take the needle and I go under this strand here. Oops. Like that. Then I go under this piece here. And I let go of the thumb and then I just pull. And that's your first stitch that you cast on. Now another thing too that I want to mention too, if you're more comfortable using a slip knot initially, you can use a slip knot. Just remember to count that slip knot as a stitch. But I don't use a slip knot whenever I do my cast on. Okay? Alright, so let's do it again. Thumb like this. Go under here. Go under this piece here. And then release your thumb and pull. Take your thumb. Go under this yarn here. Like that. And that bottom strand here, you want to do like that with your needle. Release the thumb and pull. Do this a few more times. Okay. Take your thumb, go around the yarn like that. Take your needle like that. And then that other piece of yarn you want to go under like this. And then release the thumb and pull. Okay, I'll do it one more time. Okay. And you just keep doing that until you have 80 stitches on your knitting needle. And you see that's 1 stitch, 2 stitch, 3 stitch, 4, 5, and 6. So right now we're at 6 stitches. So we're going to meet back up once you have 80 stitches on your knitting needle. Okay, I now have 80 stitches casted on my knitting needles. So one thing that I want to show y'all, you see how I have everything twisted like this? You do not want that whenever you start working your beanie. Or else your hat is going to be all sorts of twisted. You want to make sure all your stitches point to the inside of the center. So I'm going to fix all mine right now for y'all and show y'all how you want it. And just one twist will mess up your beanie. And this was something when I first learned how to knit beanies, I would twist mine sometimes. It took me a little while to get the hang of it. Okay, so you see how all my stitches are facing the inside. This is how you want it. And even as you're knitting, especially the first few rounds, you gotta kind of be careful because they may try to twist on you while you're knitting. So make sure, like I said, I cannot stress this enough, make sure they're pointed inside. No twist. And you want to take it where you're going to have to get this closer to the edge of the needle. I advise the end cap for this part. Okay, that should work. And you're going to want to grab your stitch marker. Okay. Okay. So I'm removing my end caps. And you know how there's a term where you knit in the round? I'm fixing to show you right now exactly what that means. Okay, so to connect these two ends, what you're going to do is you go in like you normally would a knit stitch on that very first stitch of the round. You have your piece that you normally use when you're knitting, the one that connects to the skein of yarn. And here's your end piece right here. So that for that very first stitch, you want to grab both of them. And you use both of them when you go over, you see? You're using both of them. And you go like you would a knit stitch. And you want to pull after you do this. So you want it nice and snug. And you see how you have like 2 strands of yarn here? What you want to do is take your stitch marker and go under both of those pieces of yarn. And that's your first stitch after doing the first round. The very first round. Your first stitch of the first round. Okay? Now, you want to continue with just the piece that connects to the skein of yarn. You're not using the end piece anymore. Okay? And we're going to be doing a ribbed brim. And I'm doing a knit 2 purl 2 ribbing for my brim. But you will see in patterns, sometimes you'll see it knit 1 purl 1 or like knit 2 purl 1. But for this knit along, I am doing a ribbing of knit 2 purl 2. Okay, so we already did the first knit stitch. So you want to do your second knit stitch now. So you do like that. Okay. Now we're getting into the purl stitches. So you want to make sure you put that piece of yarn, the one that connects to your skein of yarn, in front. And now we're doing 2 purl stitches. Okay. We're going back to knit stitches. You want this yarn in the back. And make sure you have that piece of yarn in the proper position when you're going between your knits and your purl stitches. So we knit 2 more stitches. 1. And I do have tutorials for all the stitches that you need to know how to do to make this beanie if you need to review them. I will link them all in the description box of this video. Okay, so another knit stitch, and with the knit stitch you just go in like this, wrap your piece around like that, take your right needle under, and then push the stitch off. Okay, we're going back to the purl stitch. Put your yarn in the front again. Okay. And you go in like this. Wrap your yarn around. Oops, it fell, sorry. Okay. You do like that. And another thing I do want to point out when you do your first row, you want to try to keep your needles close together, because if you don't, you'll get more like this ladder. This piece will get bigger and bigger, and it'll make it hard to knit your stitches. Now, if you do have some gap here, you can correct it when you get to the end of the round, and I'll show you what you need to do for that. Okay, so put the yarn back in the back again. You do your knit stitches. 1. 2. Okay, we're going back to the purls. Put that yarn in front. Another purl stitch. Oops, let me pull my yarns. Okay. Okay. You go back to your knit stitch, yarn in back. And always remember, when you're knitting, the yarn's in the back. 1 and 2. Now 2 purl stitches That yarn is in the front now. Put it in the front. And remember, when you're purling, it's in the front. Okay. And then you're going back to the knit, put it in the back. And you just keep doing 2 knit stitches, 2 purl stitches all the way around your first round. And we'll meet back up right before you get to the stitch worker. Okay, we have finished round 1. And you want your last stitch of round 1 to be a purl stitch. If it's not a purl stitch, you made a boo-boo. Okay, so remember how earlier I mentioned about when you're knitting your first round, you want to knit with your knitting needles close together, so the points close together? Because if you don't, you see how I'm pulling them out? That's what you'll start getting. And it can get bigger. But in the event you do have some gap here, and even if you really don't, what you do is you take your end piece right here and you give it a good pull. And I will recommend doing this even if you don't have a gap, because you want this nice and tight. You do not want any ladder when you start your first row. Okay, and again, make sure all your stitches are pointing inside, because you don't want those twisted, you don't want to twist your rows. Okay, so since we ended with a purl stitch, your yarn is still in the front. You want to make sure you pull that to the back. And remember, when we did that first stitch of round 1, it basically kind of looks like 2 stitches. And we put the stitch marker around it. Well, oops. What you want to do is you take your stitch marker out now. And you place it like this on your right needle. And that very first stitch of round 2 is basically like knitting 2 together. So you're going to go through both those strands for that first stitch. After round 2, it's basically that first stitch will start being a regular knit stitch. Okay. And like I said, make sure it's tight here. And then you do your knit stitch. And again, I like to tug on it a lot at the beginning. So like I said, I just tugged on it again to ensure it's nice and tight. And we're going to continue doing our rib stitching, knit 2, purl 2. And this will be done for 10 rounds that we're going to be doing knit 2, purl 2. Now some patterns, you may only do 5 rows for your brim. You may also see it where patterns will tell you to do 1 inch. That's why I recommend having a tape measurer. But, okay, so we did the first knit stitch. Now we're doing the second knit stitch. Now we're going to purl, put that yarn in the front. Oops, it slipped out on me. Another purl stitch. Go back to your knit stitch, yarn and back. Oops, I don't have it. Okay. Okay. and then your second knit stitch. Put that yarn in the front again for your purl stitches. 1 purl, 2 purls, put it back in the back, 2 knit stitches, okay, back in the front for the purls, 2 purl stitches, okay, and then put it back in the back, and you're just going to continue knit 2, purl 2 all the way around, and we will meet back up right before the stitch marker. Okay, we have just finished round 2. Now we're going to be starting round 3, and round 3 through round 10 is worked exactly the same way. So we're gonna slip that stitch, slip stitch, got a little tongue tied. Okay, and we're continuing doing knit 2, purl 2. And make sure that you have your yarn in the back, because that last stitch of round 2 is a purl stitch, so you need to flip it to the back when you start round 3. Okay, so knit 2, now we purl 2, yarn in the front, 1, 2, and now we go back to knit, yarn in the back, we knit 2, 1, 2, now we do our purl 2, yarn in the front, 1, 2, and now it's time to knit 2, yarn in the front, and basically just keep doing knit 2, purl 2, and we'll meet back up right before the stitch marker. Okay, we are now finished with round 3, and round 4 is going to be worked just like round 3. So remember, you want to put your yarn in the back. Okay, slip your stitch marker, and we're going to knit 2, purl 2. So knit 1, knit 2, put that yarn back in the front, purl 1, purl 2, put the yarn to the back again, knit 1, knit 2, yarn back to the front, purl 1, purl 2, okay, yarn back to the back, we're going to knit 2, knit 1, knit 2, yarn back to the front, purl 1, and purl 2, and put your yarn back to the back. Okay, at this point you should have the hang of what we're doing. So you're going to continue round 4, knit 2, purl 2, and when you finish round 4, you will then do 6 more rows, knit 2, purl 2, and after you have 10 rows total, we will meet back up and we will start the body of the hat. Okay, we have now finished round 10. So the brim is now completed for your beanie. And I have a few things that I want to point out to y'all before we get into the body of the hat. So this is basically what ribbed stitching looks like. Now, like I said earlier, sometimes with ribbed stitching, how many knit stitches and purl stitches you do differ. But right here, how you see the V's, these are your knit stitches. And these little like wiggly lines, those are your purl stitches. See, here's your knit stitches. These are your purl stitches. Now, whenever you're knitting flat, things are a little different with flat knitting. But when you're knitting in the round, this is how it would look, okay? So at this point, we're going to start the body of the hat and we will be changing colors. Now, some of y'all may be using interchangeable needles like I am. And I am going to show you how to change your needles if you're using interchangeable needles. And if you're not using interchangeable, I will show you how to transfer to another set of circular knitting needles. Because at this point, we're gonna start using a 5.5 millimeter knitting needle. Some patterns you will see will just use one size for their knitting needle for the whole pattern. Some you will see where they change it to a little larger size after you finish the brim. I like to change my needles after I finish the brim. So if you're using interchangeable needles, you want to take your little screwdriver device and make sure your stitches are pushed down. You don't want them to drop off. And just unscrew the needle. And screw it back in. The new needle. Okay, and then you would do the same thing for the other side. So that's all there is to changing your needles. Okay, so if you have the interchangeable, basically you would just keep doing your stitches like you normally would. But if you're transferring to a different set of knitting needles, see, I now have 2 sets right here. Okay, so normally when you knit, you're working your stitches, you use the right needle and go in. But instead, we're going to basically use one side. This would be of the new set to go in. That's really the only difference. So we're going to get started on the body. And again, I want to stress, make sure at this point you will be using your 5.5 millimeter knitting needles. So we're going to cut the gray yarn since we're incorporating a new color. And you want to leave long enough so that you can weave in your ends. And just cut that yarn. Okay, so if you are transferring to another set of knitting needles, I advise putting an end cap on the other end. I always love to protect stitches to avoid drop stitches. And you might even want to put your other one on this side. Okay? And at this point, you want to put your yarn to the back. The body is done in all stockinette stitches. And stockinette is where you're doing all knit stitches. Now, one thing I do want to point out, in the round, it's all knit stitches to get the stockinette stitch. But when you're working flat, it works differently. When you're flat knitting, you do your front row knit stitches and then your back row purl stitches. And when I say flat knitting, I mean where it doesn't connect. This all connects since we're knitting in the round. Okay, remove your stitch marker. Okay. So you want to grab your needle, and you just go in, and it may kind of be awkward if you're transferring your stitches. Okay, you want to go in like you normally would with a knit stitch. You're going through the gray piece of yarn. You want to grab your blue yarn, and you want to wrap it around that right needle. And again, you want to leave enough of the end piece so that you can weave in your stitches. Okay, and basically at that point you just continue. You see, you just continue with your knit stitch, and your start of your rounds, it's gonna be kind of awkward because it's loose. So normally, like, you do your first stitch, you want to kind of take your two end pieces of yarn and twist them together. That kind of helps hold it in place. Now, one thing that I saw somebody do, typically you're not supposed to use knots in knitting, but I saw someone where they initially did put a knot loose enough, and then they undid it later on whenever they were going to weave in their strands of yarn. But like I said, you just basically twist it. Okay, then you just knit into the next stitch. Okay, and at this point, give it a good, nice pull, because you want everything tight. And I said, I'm just knitting. Okay. And like I said, I want to point out, see, this is the new needles that you're transferring to. And you see that's the leg of the old one. And like I said, just keep doing your knit stitches all the way around. And we're gonna meet back up right before you knit the last stitch. Okay, we're at that last stitch of the round, and you want to knit that, and then you just take your old needle out. And this is what I wanted to make sure. You got to put your stitch marker back. There. always make sure you know where the start of your round is. Okay, so we're done with the initial needles. All right, so for round 2, this is going to be a little different than when you're normally knitting your rounds, because when you change colors in the round, if you just keep knitting your stitches, you will it will look crooked. You will see a crookedness to your rows where your round starts. You want to avoid that. Okay, so if you're knitting 3 or more rows of the same color, I find the easiest method to do is you go in purlwise and slip the stitch like this. Just like that. Okay, I'll put the stitch back and I'll show it again. You take your right knitting needle, you go in purlwise like that. Your right needle's on top of your left, and just slip the stitch. You're just transferring it from the left needle to the right needle. Okay? Now, if you have projects that it's only 1 or 2 rows, using a new color, there is a different way you need to go about it. I'm not going to get into that in this tutorial, but I do want to make y'all aware of that. And I do have a tutorial in my knitting playlist tutorial. I'm sorry, my knitting tutorial playlist that shows how to do it if you're only knitting 1 or 2 rows. But we're going to be doing blocks of 4 rows of the same color, so we can do the easy method. And there are other methods, like I said, to doing this, but I find this is the easiest. All right, so after this, you just continue on your way, just knitting your stitches. And make sure you give a good tug. Usually I tend to tug the loose yarns after I do the first and second stitch, after doing a new color on the second row of it, because you don't want to get ladders. Okay, and just keep on knitting. Okay, and I'll meet you back up right before the stitch marker. Okay, we have now finished the second round of the body. And we're going to start on round 3. And basically, it's just knit stitches all the way around. The row that differs after you change colors is always the first stitch of the second round of a new color. Alright, so just slip that stitch marker and start doing your knit stitches. And you see right here, you see how it's loose? Give those end pieces a tug again. And just keep on knitting, and we'll meet back up at the right before the stitch marker. Okay, we just finished the third round of the new color. And now we're gonna slip our stitch marker and just continue doing our knit stitches all the way around. And we'll meet back up at the end of the round, right before the stitch marker. Okay, we have now finished the 4th and final round of the new color, of the blue color. And I do want to point out something to y'all. when you hear the term stockinette stitch, this is what it looks like. It's that little V. And all your stitches will be little V's. So when you hear the term stockinette, that is what it looks like. And it looks the same way in flat knitting, even though it's done differently. Alright, so we now have 14 rows of the beanie completed. And we will continue next week on the second portion of the beanie. And my plans are, I will try to upload the new video Friday evenings. I may have accidentally said Thursday evening at the beginning of the video. If I did, it's actually Friday evening. If it's not posted Friday evening, then it should be up sometime Saturday. Now, the last video, that one, it is possible I may not have it finished and uploaded until Sunday, since I have two different methods to show you for the decreases, and I'll also have to show you how to weave in your ends. But yeah, that's the plans for getting the videos out for this knit along. I am curious, is this your first time knitting a beanie? Or is this your first time changing colors on a project? Please let me know that in the comments below. Also, I would love to know if you're participating in this knit along. Let me know that in the comments too. And if for some reason y'all have any questions or y'all struggle with anything on this tutorial, please feel free to contact me. You can email me at justanotherstitch2020@gmail.com. My email address is in the description box of this video, along with all my other videos and on my about page. So I hope y'all have enjoyed this portion of the knit along, and I hope y'all all are having a fabulous yarny day. Be the light, and bye.